On the screen with me is a spreadsheet where I've broken down recent website accessibility lawsuits. But before we get into the key takeaways, I want to focus in on one of the companies that was sued, and that company is Selenite Beauty LLC. On this next worksheet, I have 3 screenshots. One is from their Google card, and they have 4.9 stars over 67 reviews. And then we see it's temporarily closed. And it says Selenite Beauty and the spa at Selenite is temporarily closed. And this is for a day spa. And then there's also, they had a store that was, they were selling retail products out of. And then their Instagram account has 16,500 followers. And I have this snippet from one of the posts. It says, the past 5 years have also been extremely difficult for me personally. I have grown my family, experienced challenges with my personal health, and suffered significant losses in my family, all while navigating running a small business and being a mom. All this is to say, as our lease term comes to an end, I have decided not to renew and to temporarily close Selenite while looking for a new location. Unfortunately, our business model paired with our current location is simply not sustainable. So here we have, it's not, she's not attributing the business closing to this complaint being filed against her, this lawsuit, but still, that only makes things more difficult. And I bring this up just because small business owners, even if the company appears to be successful, and by all appearances it is, right? 4.9 stars over 67 reviews, so many Instagram followers, I think it's 16,500, but still, this owner still shut down her business. And it takes a lot to shut down a business like this because there's so much invested into it. All of the momentum comes to a halt. And then that's what I have on this next screenshot. I took a screenshot of their website. She took her website down. It says, as we announced on July 10th, Selenite Beauty and the spa at Selenite are temporarily closed. We currently do not have a reopening date. And then it says, there's some follow us on social media. Thank you for an incredible 5 years. We look forward to seeing you again soon. So hopefully they're able to bounce back. And while this business, it doesn't look like they shut down because of a lawsuit. Of course, that didn't help anything. But some small businesses are shutting down because of these lawsuits. And I bring this up because a lot of small businesses are running thinner than you might think. This Selenite Beauty has all of the appearances of success, and they still had to shut down. And hopefully they come back. But while this is unfair to even large companies, what's going, the serial litigation, the abusive litigation that's going on, while it's unfair to everyone, larger companies are able to absorb this better as more of a cost of doing business. What we see here is that smaller businesses, they're not able to, even when they're successful, just because there are so many things that small businesses already have to deal with. And then you stack on a lawsuit on top of that. And with a lawsuit, you're easily out five figures, easily for most small businesses. So, and the more successful you are, the more likely it is to be 5 figures or above. So I wanted to bring that up, but now let's get into the data. And so what I did is I wanted to get a formally research what is going on right now with website accessibility litigation. So most of the cases I looked at were from the last few months. For California, I went further back even into 2023, just because for my court trackers, it's harder to get those state court cases. But I do have cases from California. We have California, we have Florida, we have Illinois, we have Pennsylvania, we have North Carolina. So we have a very nice mix of different state and federal courts. And we have new plaintiffs lawyers that have entered into the field, and we see some of the same plaintiffs law firms still here. So one of the longstanding law firms is Stein Sachs, but now we have new attorneys for Stein Sachs that have come up, and they're starting to sign the complaints filed. So Rami Salim being one. We also see a new entrant, Gabriel Levy. He's more prevalent now. He actually files a lot of complaints. Same with Uri Horowitz, and then there's Aleksandra Kravets. So those are some new entrants that have been filing quite a bit. But as I said, there are still several mainstays that are still very active. And by the way, with this research, this was only a sample, but it's a really good sample. It's of these most recent complaints. And what I've done is I looked through the accessibility issues just to see what's coming up the most often. And so that's what I have today. I have some data on, what to look out for. And then one other thing here on the industries, we see retail being the most targeted, and then second most would be restaurants. And then we also have healthcare. So doctors and dentists seem to be targeted a lot. So that came up. So know that these are the 3 industries that I saw coming up with the most frequency as I was looking through these complaints. But now let's get into the key takeaways. One, we're well beyond scans. This is, if you're thinking that you're going to scan your website using Wave or Google Lighthouse and you're going to be in good shape, we are so far beyond scans. And I think what's happened is more and more of these plaintiffs' law firms have their own accessibility teams involved. And so they're sourcing out work. It's at least some of them, I think, are sourcing out work to accessibility professionals. Part of the reason I say that is because of the specificity and the level of detail that goes into writing out the accessibility issues. We see less and less issues, or more issues that are going beyond scans. So it's not like scans are unhelpful. Scans are still helpful, but we're seeing accessibility issues that you would really only find if you were manually going through a website. And by the way, and it wasn't for any of the firms that I know of that were listed in this complaint, but I've been recruited by plaintiffs' law firms. So this is happening. This is a practice. It happens. So looking further, one accessibility issue that comes up is skip to content links. So one important part here is just because you have a skip to content link, if it doesn't work, then that's still an accessibility issue. And that's what the plaintiff's lawyers are detailing is, okay, you have a skip to content link, but it doesn't actually work. So, accessibility issue here. And then also submenus. Submenus are really, I see submenus coming up all of the time. Make sure that you focus in on submenus and make sure your submenus and all of the potential accessibility issues are completely accessible. On occasion, this is less often the case now. Now I see a lot more specificity, but on occasion there will be a vague claim, and it will be something to the effect of the website does not properly interact with screen reader technology, so our plaintiff was denied access. That doesn't state any. That's just a broad statement that there's no, the website is incompatible, but incompatible how? So I wouldn't, if you have that type of complaint made against you, if you have that allegation, that's something where you want to look into a potential defense, because that's just a very weak claim. It's just a broad conclusory statement. Okay, it doesn't work, but how? Like, what is the actual accessibility issue? But more often, what is more often the case is these complaints are getting very granular. So even plaintiffs' law firms that in the past were using templated claims, they'll still use templated claims, but even among the templated claims, you see more specifics. And then sometimes what happens is they'll have this grouping of accessibility issues, and then they'll get into a few specifics where they actually detail some accessibility issues and tie them to the website. But then they'll rely upon their fallback, which is that there's so many accessibility issues and they include but are not limited to, and then they'll have a few accessibility issues listed. Also, I've seen the lack of an accessibility statement be mentioned. Also, accessibility issues dealing with the accessibility statement. So note that. And then also note one part here is that when you're looking at the different issues that are claimed in the complaints, it's not always a direct tie into the WCAG success criteria. So that's typically how we think of accessibility issues, right? Is like we look to these success criteria and they tell us what to do for accessibility. But practically, when I'm looking through these complaints, we see certain applications of the success criteria that are claimed over and over again. So that's one thing that, in my course, I have a breakdown of the lessons and I don't actually tie them to the success criteria because to me, what's more practical for people is to know things like, okay, it's the submenu. And so sometimes, and this is fluid, right? Sometimes it is more of like hey, just take care of the actual success criteria. But other times it's more helpful to know this is what is actually the issue that is going on. For example, with skip links, which is bypass blocks, which I believe is 2.4.1. I may be mistaken on that. But with bypass blocks, plaintiffs' lawyers are looking for skip links, but skip links aren't technically required here. There are other ways to bypass blocks. So there's really the requirement that the actual wording is that there's a mechanism to bypass blocks. It does not say that there has to be a skip link. So that's just one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to knowing the accessibility issues to look for. When I talk about the accessibility issues, it's not always tied to a success criteria. Now, it's nice when we do that. It makes it more clean and neat. But in the practical applications, if I'm a website owner and I'm just looking to go through this and make sure I take care of the accessibility issues as fast as possible, it's like, tell me what to look for on my submenus so I know, right? So definitely look out for submenus because that comes up a lot. Let's see what else we have here. Also, what I was just getting at is there are multiple claims that are being made that aren't even tied to the web content accessibility guidelines. So yeah, they're best practice, right? Like it's nice if we have this accessibility consideration. But these are things the plaintiffs' lawyers have gone so far. They are so far outside of reason that they are now making claims that are not tied to the web content accessibility guidelines. And I'll give you an example. It's with the opening, when you have a link that opens up to a new tab or a new window. Now, it's nice if you have advanced notice of this, right? Like a link opens to a new tab or a new window, but that's not explicitly required under the web content accessibility guidelines. Not only is it not required under AA conformance, it's not required under AAA conformance. So it's a nice to have. It is a best practice. It is something that if we were making a website accessible, it is a consideration that we'd want to keep in mind. But this is not even something that's in AAA conformance. So you have to really, part of this is like understanding accessibility, what's actually in the web content accessibility guidelines, what's actually something that is a barrier to access, and making sure that plaintiffs lawyers, if you are trying to lower your settlement, or even if you are defending against the complaint, working making sure that you counter them and you defend them and you start to unravel what they are claiming, because they are out of control. They're absolutely out of control. And now they're throwing all of these different accessibility issues that are just like nice to have, but it's like this would be requiring like pristine accessibility. Accessibility is difficult. There's a lot to get through, and it's very easy once you get through the accessibility issues to still have accessibility issues because of the dynamic nature of websites. And so staying on top of that, even if you have a process in place, staying on top of that, there can be accessibility issues. And these plaintiffs lawyers are so absurd that some of them are just requiring the strictest of things, to where if you have one thing wrong, or not necessarily one thing wrong, but if there's one thing wrong in the sense of and when looking at their claims, they're going to add this to their claim. So this is not to paint the picture that this is impossible, but this is to say you want to have as best of accessibility as possible, and then also be aware of some of these things that they're claiming that aren't even technically required under the web content accessibility guidelines. If you're aware of this, for example, like the link opening up to a new window or a new tab, then you can be preemptive about it and try to just take this outside of where they can even make a claim about it, because it is something that I see come up, and it's with some regularity. So this is not uncommon. So it's definitely something to be aware of. And then, so all of these recommendations, I've updated the ADA compliance course to reflect, even more of these changes being made. The course has already been updated a few times, but I wanted to go over everything. And, my ordering of accessibility issues has changed. Some of them are just much more targeted than the others. And so if you're unfamiliar with the course, the idea here is that I'm going to prioritize the accessibility issues for you, and then tell you how to find and fix each issue. And then so you can work through, and then as you are improving the accessibility of your website, you are reducing your risk of being sued, because these are the issues that are most frequently claimed in lawsuits. And if you can start to chip away at the issues and eventually get to the point where you've taken care of the top 15 issues that are claimed, there's just less and less to go on. And what happens is a lot of these plaintiffs' law firms, they're looking to paint a story. They want to paint a story that your website is wholly inaccessible. You are purposefully discriminating against people with disabilities. And so the less issues you have, the better off you're going to be. And so that's what the course is, reducing your risk of being sued as you are working through the accessibility issues. I will link to that in the description. Also, more updates are coming from me. I know I haven't posted videos recently. This is not because I'm simply not posting. It's just because there's more going on, and I will have updates coming on the new releases that I have. But I am working, and one of the releases I think everybody who is subscribed to this channel will like. And that's all I'll say about that for now, but I think everybody will like one of the releases. And hopefully these things are happening sooner rather than later. Updates are coming in the next few weeks. And then there will be a really big update here in the next few months. And then last, I will say, make sure that, if possible, support small businesses. And one way to do this is just, instead of buying directly off of Amazon, if you can find the product online and buy directly from the website, that will save money for a lot of small businesses. But then also, if you're local, if you can buy from non-chain stores. Small businesses are fairly easy to identify, and so a lot of times you'll get better service. Especially with customer service, a lot of corporations, they send you to a chatbot, doesn't answer your questions. And it's not to say that a lot of companies, like bigger companies, aren't offering excellent products and services. But where it's possible, it's always good to support small businesses, especially the small businesses in your community. So I will leave it at that, and then I will include all of the plaintiffs' law firms in this Excel spreadsheet. I will include those in the description. And then if you'd like to learn about the accessibility issues that are most commonly claimed, I'll also include a link to the ADA compliance course in the description. But this is an update. These are some of the key takeaways from looking at these most recent lawsuits filed. So it's really important to know this is evolving. This is not staying static. We are beyond scan. So if anybody's telling you it's a matter of Google Lighthouse or Wave or even Power Mapper, that's only the beginning. That is not the end of it. And one note on Power Mapper, it is frequently used by plaintiffs' law firms to try to get more granular issues, but it is a paid scan, and it just really it's very, very granular. But I don't think you need to go out and buy Power Mapper to find the issues. Most of those issues are going to come up in Wave is not nearly as granular, but like if you look at Axe is going to have most of what Power Mapper has. So I think that's it. I will include more information in the description.